Something so terrible, something so horrific, and it's your worst nightmare. It's all those video nasties that you've ever thought about happening within walking distance.
Did shake a lot of the girls up, give them the creeps, you know, that something like this was going on so close to where they were.
It's just like hit us so badly, do you know what I mean? It's like so scary. And we feel really lucky that it wasn't one of us.
This is Cromwell Street in Gloucester. Earlier this year, 9 bodies were found in the cellar and the garden of this house, and no doubt the grim story of what really happened here will be told in what will be one of the trials of the century. This programme is not about that. It's about the people who live here, those who live opposite, those who live next door, those who live just across the road. They were neighbours, living ordinary lives, until the world's press landed on their doorstep one February morning.
Home Office pathologist Bernard Knight back at 25 Cromwell Street with yet more human remains to examine. The 7th body was recovered this morning. Announcements about new finds are now coming almost daily.
Identify the 3 sets of remains found in a garden at Cromwell Street in Gloucester. They believe one of the bodies...
One of Britain's biggest murder inquiries, the discovery of 9 sets of remains and world attention.
Cromwell Street in Gloucester's city centre is just a stone's throw from the city's famous cathedral and docks. Made up mostly of lodging houses and flats, it's an inner city street with a transient population. Some call it Bedsitland, just an ordinary, anonymous street in an unsuspecting town. But events earlier this year changed all that.
The headlines: police are still digging a garden in Cromwell Street. Television crews, reporters and sightseers have been gathering on the street for most of the morning. World attention has focused on Gloucester after police discovered the remains of 8 bodies in the garden and cellar of number 25. A police spokesman says they expect their grim search to continue for several more days. Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Police searching the garden of 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester's city centre have found the remains of 2 bodies. They've been digging day and night and discovered the bodies in the early hours of this morning.
The Brunswick is one of Cromwell Street's local pubs. Landlord Ian Ross couldn't believe his ears when his radio alarm went off one morning.
To suddenly find on the news one morning, to wake up to the radio, to hear that police were actually digging for bodies in a street that was only 50 yards away, was quite frightening. And the first reaction is disbelief, and I think this is what the people of Gloucestershire felt. It's disbelief, you know, they've got it wrong. It can't be happening in the city centre. Surely someone would know, someone would have noticed. And then as it progressed and bodies were being found, I think then the sort of horror and the shock set in that, you know, surely we would have known, something would have given it away. It couldn't have been happening.
Just a step away from the pub, a young couple had set up home for the first time. What was to become a new start in life for both of them turned into a nightmare just 2 weeks later.
Neither of us were happy about where we were living before, and we moved in here for a bit of peace and quiet, a bit of privacy. And then the next thing, all hell's let loose, a few doors down, and there's police at the front and the back. And we're in the national spotlight. I had an inkling something was going on because the gentleman who employed me at the time was a magistrate, and apparently he signed the papers to allow the police to go and search 25 Cromwell Street. But even he wouldn't tell me exactly what it was about, and we had to wait for the newspapers to come out.
Landlady Lynn Hill has wanted to attract people to her Cromwell Street house for years, but was horrified when so many unwanted visitors turned up together.
It's been quite dramatic, actually. The street will never be the same again. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you was just there one morning, you opened the door and, like, the street was full of television and reporters, like, and I had to ask somebody up the road. I said, you know, what was going on? I mean, we hadn't got a clue what was going on. And then we was told that, and we thought, oh, that can't be right, like. But as it turned out, it was. And it started from the one day, and it's just, like, just went on and on. It was just unbelievable. I've got a 15-year-old daughter who was all of a sudden thrown into the limelight, as you could say, with all this what's been going on. She never had so many visitors and friends and what have you as she did over the past few weeks. But, I mean, we've got to live with it, and she's got to live with it. She's very bouncy, but it did affect her. It affected a lot of the young girls in the street.
When I first found out, when we first, like, realised, do you know what I mean, it didn't sink in, first of all. It was like, no, don't believe it, I don't believe it. And then after a while, it started sinking in. And then everybody at school was coming up to me, oh, Terry, what's going on? What's going on? Terry, what's going on? It was like people I didn't even really know that well. Do you know what I mean? They, oh, Terry, you live in Cromwell Street. Oh, my God, you live in Cromwell Street. Oh, I'd hate to live there. I'd hate to live there. It's like, because of all that and all the gossiping that was going around my schoolwork, it was just like going down. My grades was going down. I just couldn't concentrate on anything else.
Such was the effect on Terry that she was one of many who needed professional counselling. Her mum called in the social services to make sure her daughter was okay.
I did have some help because, like, I couldn't cope, do you know what I mean? It was just like getting all on top of me, so I went to a social worker. Like, it really helped them because I was getting it off my chest because everybody was just talking about it all the time, so I had to speak to somebody about it who'd listen to me, not just want to know the gossip. I had to speak to someone who'd listen, and my social worker did listen.
22-year-old Dave Smith moved into the street, into what was a home from home, to lodge with landlady Lynn and daughter Terry. Little did he realise the horror which would emerge from the house opposite.
It's just still a shock, like it really hasn't affected me at the moment. You know, it's just like if I go to anywhere, like, and they say, oh, where do you live? Oh, Cromwell Street. Oh, no. You know, did you know them? Did you know what was going on? Well, if I knew what was going on, I'd have said something about it. You know, you can't keep that kind of thing to yourself. You know, you've got, like, people coming round on the weekends just to look at the house and that kind of thing. You know, they're just coming on just out of curiosity, I suppose, but, you know, it's all right for them because they can just sort of, like, drive past, and then that's it, like, for the likes of me and my landlady and her daughter, like, we've got to live in the street and we've got to carry on living here. And, like I said, it hasn't sunk in yet, but I expect it will do over the next couple of weeks, like, it's just a shock.
Dave, Lynn and Terry can watch TV these days in peace, knowing Cromwell Street will not be making the headlines. But the very fact that we are filming them is evidence itself that events will just not go away. And it's not so long ago they were facing news bulletins like this.
Journalists and TV crews have travelled from all corners of the earth to report at the spot where so far 8 bodies have been found.
I said the 7 bodies are there, they're behind, 3 from there, 4 from there. Now we've got 8. 1 from bathroom. Doesn't it?
Oi, este é o endereço da Casa dos Horrores.
In Gloucester, Chris Reason, 7 Nightly News, Australia.
By about day 3 or 4, then we had news crews turning up from the TV companies. We had journalists, not just from this country, from the tabloids, but from abroad as well, hungry for news. And they were literally accosting anybody and everybody, trying to get any information at all. And it was becoming then a nightmare. And it started very early in the morning, as early as 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and went right through until the last news bulletins were finished, up until midnight. So you had this constant noise, you had this constant toing and froing. And so the life of the people on the street was totally disrupted. And they just wanted to get away from it, but they couldn't.
After a shopping trip, Tracy and her son Jonathan know that today, when they shut their front door, they can safely shut out the world.
A French woman knocked on the door and she's blabbering on the phone. She said, excuse me, I'm English. All right, shut the door. well, there's loads of reporters around TV, there's 7 Sounders down here as well, newspaper reporters. And they left it until, like, evening time, about 9, 10 o'clock. Started banging on everyone's door down the street. They banged on my door. Right, second time, that's enough. Babby was asleep downstairs in the front bedroom, and I was just running myself a bath. I thought, right, that's enough, so I put a note on the door. Got told to take it down, it was in bad taste. I got a copy of it here, actually. To all reporters, there is a young child asleep in the front room. The next reporter to knock on the door will find themselves buried in my garden. Thank you. But I got told to take it down because it was in bad taste.
Well, I was actually offered from a gentleman from the press. I was told if I could actually get inside the house and take any of the photos from actually inside the house, he'd offer me £5,000. I don't want nothing to do with it. I'll get caught for that £5,000. It isn't worth going to jail for, you know.
We were here working, and the gentleman from the press wanted to have a look in the cellar. And I said, well, what for? And he said, oh, he said, just wanted to have a look to compare what the cellars was like. And I said, well, they're not like over the road anyway. And I said, but yeah, you can come down and take a photograph. And he came down, he took a photograph of the cellar. And then a couple of days later, I was horrified to open the Sun newspaper and find there was a picture of my cellar in there. And it had got underneath it, grim, the cellar of number 25 Cromwell Street, where 5 bodies were found. As you can see from the cellar now, it is identical. It is no way the cellar at number 25. This is my cellar. I complained to the Press Complaints Commission, and they took it up for me. And a few days later, I had an apology printed into the daily paper.
As Michael gets ready to go to work as a driver for the local bus company, he knows he'll be able to come and go as he pleases. But it wasn't so long ago that, like many of his neighbours, he at times felt as though he'd lost his identity.
This is the rear of the property where we live, and the police incident van was parked over there for the whole time that they were here conducting their investigation. There was a police barrier across our gateway there, which I had to pass through every day when I went to and from work. Probably have to identify myself or sign in because there were different police on duty each day, and of course they wouldn't recognise me. It got rather tedious and irritating after a while. From here you can see how close we are to the rear of number 25.
This is what one man wanted to produce, but thank goodness the authorities thought it in bad taste and banned it. But it was just this sort of thing and headlines like these which angered and upset so many local residents accused of cashing in on the horror.
People said that we was charging for reporters to go to the toilet. I wasn't charging for people to go to the toilet. If they wanted to go to the toilet and they knocked on the door, yeah, they could go if they wanted, but we didn't charge for it. Me and my mum made the police officers a cup of tea, but we didn't charge that. That was just like, they had to stand out here all day. They couldn't get a drink, so we made them a drink. And because people seen us taking the cups of tea over to them, they suddenly thought, oh, well, people in residents of Cromwell Street are making teas and selling sandwiches. And like, there was not one person in this street who sold one cup of tea or sold one sandwich.
It wasn't the people in Cromwell Street that was making the money. It was another street around the corner where the sandwiches and that were being sold. And we've said that it wasn't Cromwell Street, but we've still had to take the rap for it.
Whether or not it was the residents on Cromwell Street who made money, a lot of other locals did in fact make a packet, but many more found fame instead. Tracy had her 15 seconds of fame on the 6 o'clock news, the day the police moved out.
The day the police were leaving, the house had got sealed off. It was in the evening time, and I'd walked round the shop with Jonathan to go and get some milk. And on the way back, there's a cameraman and the sound man there doing like residents' reactions. Now it was all over, so I give them my reaction. Anyway, they said they'd show it on the evening news that evening. 6:30, we turned the telly on and they showed it. Of course, John, my mum's on telly. That's my mum on telly. Anyway, Dad had videoed it for the 10:30 news at night. And every time we went round there for about a week, do you want to see yourself on telly? Even now when I go downtown, Jonathan says, oh, my mum's on telly. And where I'm working during the day, I get customers in now. Weren't you the one that was on telly? Don't you live down Cromwell Street? Yes. Forget the jokes, I've heard enough. So people still remember, even though I've had my hair done, haven't I, since then?
Yes, please. Yeah.
We were getting visits here in the pub from people who are actually making day trips, if you can believe that, to come and see Cromwell Street, to visit this site. And it's a sort of morbid curiosity that was dragging them there. And there was this ghoulish element who would then themselves perhaps come into the pub, start questioning the staff, start questioning the locals. Did you know this person? Did you ever go into Cromwell Street? And it was, I think, very, very sad attitude.
The most bizarre sight that I saw actually going on in Cromwell Street was a young model with a photographer outside, and he'd literally got the model, up against the lamppost, using number 25 as the background to take photographs of the young girl modelling.
It wasn't just the pretty and the famous who wanted to be photographed on the street. Everyday people were turning up from all corners of the world to have the photos taken outside what has become known as the House of Horrors.
There was a young couple who came up in a taxi from London, and it was so said that they paid £580 for a taxi to come up just to visit. Weekends, even now, you're still getting visitors, tourists, they're sitting outside, but they've come and they've just been staying all day long. They've had the packed lunches and the cups of tea. It was just horrendous. They've just turned it into a circus, that's all it was turned into.
Had wide coverage on the media in Australia, and we wanted to see where it all happened. We were just close to Gloucester and decided to have a look, find the street. Just taking some photographs and taking them home to show everyone where it's all happened over here.
25 Cromwell Street is now on the Australian World Tour.
Well, we wanted to come to see Cromwell Street in Gloucester. That was one of the things we had to do, and it's taken us over an hour to find it. We've asked about 5,000 people, West Cromwell Street. We sort of felt a bit funny, but we just had to see it. Just whatever reasons. Can't explain them. I mean, it's just, so years ago they had Jack the Ripper and everything else, and now in this day and age you've got this stuff. So you had to come and look, didn't you?
I think some of this we're going to have to...
a lot of it's rubbish. If we just take the bit, if we haven't just walking along.
Yeah. What are we going to do, cut between the two?
Yeah.
The news not only reached Australia, but was beamed all over the world. And although these TV technicians are amateurs, not professionals, they scoop the world's top crime correspondents. They are, in fact, a group of media students at the local college which backs onto Cromwell Street.
Two students in the second year were on the scene first. They got into a house adjacent to Cromwell Street. The owner let them in rather than let journalists in, and the pictures that they took were shot and beamed all over the world.
Inevitably, because the college is right next to Cromwell Street, the press wanted to come in, they actually wanted to photograph, they wanted to talk to students and staff to see what their feelings were. They actually wouldn't have minded pitching camp there. There was no question of that. We did allow them space so they could actually carry out some editing, as long as the students were able to work shadow them and watch what was going on.
Our interest was based on covering the media. We were covering the media, covering the case. So in that way, that was a screen for us to remove ourselves from what was going on at Cromwell Street. We wanted to focus on what the media was doing.
When the police approached us and said, would we be prepared to host an international press conference, we were delighted to accept, as long as our students can actually be there and observe firsthand what goes on. The police had said, well, we would anticipate about 40 or 50. more than 200 turned up. And they were there from Japan and Australia and America, from everywhere. And it was, I have to say, the situation, the reason they were there was very grim. It's a horror story. But the reality was quite exciting, the way it actually worked.
There was an incredible buzz about the place. I mean, there's so many cameras in there and people from all over the world. And it was interesting to see the contrast between the horrific story and the fact that these people had a job to do.
The media invasion that took place was quite frightening, really. I mean, for a time, Gloucester was the centre of the world.
Cromwell Street is right on the doorstep of the media block at the back. And we actually realised and went and found 25 Cromwell Street to observe the news crews. It was such a shock to realise how close it was. And then it really sort of hit home, you know.
One thing many people find upsetting is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is right next door. The side of the church building is a garden wall at number 25, and at first churchgoers were worried in case some bodies were buried beneath the place where they worshipped every Saturday.
As we heard the police were discovering bodies next door to the church, we also heard through the press that they were thinking the bodies had been put there in the 1970s. That meant that we were not concerned about the church building in any way, because the church building had been there since at least the 60s, if not before. As I spoke to the older members of the church, without exception, there was an attitude coming from them that said, this tells us that the church needs to be here more than ever. The situation had strengthened their faith, because they saw in these tragic events, these terrible events, just a little indication that Jesus is coming soon. The church, as it looks ahead, wants to try and become a centre for the community in Cromwell Street. Having said that, there doesn't seem to be a strong feeling of community in and around Cromwell Street.
Since the day the spotlight fell on Cromwell Street, many residents have moved away. Neighbours, once open and chatty, out on the street are now wary of strangers and keep themselves to themselves. Harold Janes has delivered the street's mail for 25 years, possibly to the victims and certainly to those accused of the murder. He's seen the street change over the years to one of derelict houses and unkempt gardens.
Well, the street is it's lost its acquaintance now with all this has been going on. It used to be quite nice at one time, quite pleasant enough. And a lot of the houses are all sort of derelict now, and it sort of looks a bit shabby now.
For legal reasons, we've been unable to tell some stories, but it's worth remembering many neighbours knew the victims, and many also knew both the people accused of the murders, and they've still got to come to terms with that. One thing is certain, next year when the trial begins, Cromwell Street will be back in the headlines and the history books. I just hope that those who come to peek and pry and photograph and report spare a thought for those who still have to live here.
It's almost as if Cromwell Street was more popular than Coronation Street. But the difference is you've got to realise these are real people. This has affected real people's lives.
I think it's brought the street a bit closer together, because like we was all out here talking about it and just none of us could believe it.
The worst part is we've got to look forward, if that's the right word, to the trial and the whole thing being dragged through the papers and on our television sets nightly, and Gloucester will be known as the murder capital of the UK.